Hi, this is Uncle Matt's D&D Neighborhood. I am Matt Finch, and I talk with interesting people. Today, I have with me Patrick Stuart. Say hello, Patrick.
Hello.
And just before we start, remind people, help me out with the Facebook algorithms. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. I do have a Patreon at patreon.com/Uncle Matt. And now we will move on to talking with Patrick, who is one of the very, very interesting people out there, sort of in some of the niches of D&D creativity. And Patrick, you sort of described your group as being, arty or artsy
Yeah,
D&D.
I think that's probably the closest you get to a group description. Bear in mind, it's a group of people who would all deny that they're part of a group. But yeah, that's the closest you're going to get, I think.
Yeah. From the outside, I
Yeah.
think, people like me tend to see you guys as a group. But let's focus on a particular book, and just sort of start there, and we're going to ramble around. Tell me a little bit about Veins of the Earth, which I have actually not read, going to do that, but have heard so much good stuff about that I want to begin exploring what you did there. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm friends with a guy called Dave McGrogan who did a book called You and Soon. And I think around 2015 or earlier, I was in there was a post of some kind I repeated on my blog. It was about the deeps of the oceans. And he came up in the comments and I was explaining to him, and I always wanted to do a book about abyssal underwater seas and hunting like white whales through invisible oceans beneath the earth. And he said, "Oh, I always wanted to do that You and Soon book. So, well, I'll race you, and whoever finishes their book first gets something. I don't know what the prize was." So I was like, okay. And then I started writing it. I started like writing bits and pieces down, and the whole thing kind of built built from there, and ended not being about undersea oceans at all, but being about like caving systems. And David finished his book first, quite a long way first. But they both did okay, I think.
So caving systems, but that sounds very general. I mean, what did you
Right.
do with caving
Okay. So
systems?
first, I decided I need to find out about the underworld, and I decided to find out about what had been basically. I think Gary and everyone else who wrote about caves in the past wrote basically from a fictional basis. So there's the cave in fiction and television and films, which is basically like a large, floored, well-lit area, pretty much like a room but with curved edges. And so I decided I'm going to start from actual relation to what cavers actually do and how caves actually work, and then just remix that. So I read a lot of caving manuals, stories about people doing caving. There's a book called Blind Descent by James Tabor, which is meant to be about a race between two groups to find the deepest cave, which is a little bit like airporty, but is a really good introduction to the topic. And so I read loads and loads and loads of stuff about underground biology, caving expeditions, various other underground elements, built up a big library of it. And then once I'd done that, I realized that actually doing a book about caving would be almost impossible. And I had to work out a bunch of really weird mechanics to make something like an underworld feel natural, even though with the mechanics I was using, it's kind of pseudo natural. It's meant to feel like caving, but in reality, the stuff you're doing would be completely impossible. So it uses stuff like a pseudo arrangement of quasi natural cavern formations, but in reality, caves are like linear. They're bad dungeons basically because they tend to go from one place to another. Yeah, they're very difficult to find your way around because there's nothing distinctive about them, so you get lost really easily, which sounds like fun but isn't in a game. They're really linear. They have insane proportions. That actually is kind of good for a game. So I turned that into a thing where everything interconnected. So instead of it being linear, you go a lot of places. I tried to caves are almost always of one like stone type. It's calcium, basically limestone. So you're looking at the same rock all the time. So I just stole from all kind of places to do with geography, do like deep time, to do with everything I could find, and jammed them together to make this confection of ideas, which ripped off the Underdark from Gary's D&D and merged them with all kinds of slightly more modern interpretations to create this kind of illusionary pseudo spelunking thing.
Okay, so let me step back first of all, to when you were talking about the real spelunking. Blind Descent, would you recommend that as as one sort of introduction to caving and gaming, or is it a much more realistic sort of thing where somebody is probably better off looking at ways that people have interpreted that for a game?
It's definitely a good. It's basically a popular adventure book. So if you don't have time, or if it's really easy to read and it's fun, and it has a lot of the details that you would need to come in later on, and if you look up the people in it on the internet, it's a really good site. It's like the Wikipedia article for caving, basically. Oh, and cavers never call it spelunking. They've got like a proper thing about it. So they always call it caving. Spelunkers are like bad people who do sports in caves, whereas
Okay.
cavers are responsible people who do very careful mapping and don't do things like in that book, there's a thing you're not meant to ever scoop booty. So if you're the first person to be in a cave passage ever, you're meant to be mapping it extremely carefully. And you're not meant to, and there's like a lottery system for who gets to explore new places because it's the most valued experience in caving, I think. And so there's an episode in that book where two cavers stumble upon a passage no one's ever been inside and run around. They don't run around, but they explore it without permission and they don't do proper mapping. When they get back, the expedition is very upset with them and throws them out.
So it's sort of the difference between archaeology and treasure hunting.
Yes, basically, yeah. Although the version I'm doing, you're very much treasure hunting. But yeah, it's
Right.
a
Well,
good
that's,
start.
so there's the very
Yeah,
first step is that we're all about treasure hunting.
yeah. It's like it's a very good end. It's a fun intro to caving if you want to find out stuff about it. As long as you don't, depending on how deep you want to go, you can go a lot deeper in.
Okay. And so then we have the next step forward, which is the interpretation um, of the reality into something that is gameable. And so you were saying, for example, that it's not fun to get lost, and that's one of the things that commonly happens, that
Yeah.
the cave systems are generally actually linear, and that doesn't work well for a game. So, and let's pursue that a little bit. What is it that uh, the sort of preconception that you would have come to this with is I have to make this work for gaming. And what is it that you added in to make it work for gaming? In other words, how did you avoid the getting lost issue? How did you avoid the linearity issue? Let's start with the getting lost. How did you handle that?
But basic tactic for the whole thing was to imagine the whole experience of caving and then kind of flip it and reverse engineer it from the point of view of playing the game. So for getting lost, uh, it's a basic principle with a large scale and small scale maps that everything interconnects at all times. So if you're lost and you want to find something, there's always a passage leading somewhere. It might not be where you want to go, and it might be hard to find. So in real life caving, if you're lost, best option is just to stay put. You're in like a branching system maybe, but someone will be along to find you. If they aren't, you're probably dead anyway. In my thing, you don't want that to happen because you want people to be still. So there's a simple, basic one rule mechanic for how long you need to search to find somewhere. And depending on the resources you've got and your skill level and other things, you'll probably find something. So it takes the agonizing, grinding experience of searching for a place to go into a one roll. As if you want to use it. If you're in like a more neatly detailed caving system, you can do it like dungeoneering. And the same is true for like pretty much everything. So in real life, you would starve to death in a caving system because that it's very like low energy in there. So instead of counting all your food and counting all your resources, veins of the earth just assumes you're nearly starving almost all the time, and that you're kind of licking lichen off the walls and eating whatever you can and being careful about your supplies. And from that point, it says you have to do. It takes it to the most dramatic decision you can make. So you have to do or find something every 3 days. You have to get money, get light, or get food. And if you haven't explicitly done that, you suffer these consequences, which make you even more desperate and crazy and hungry. And then you have to do something even more extreme. And one of the most useful things you can do is just to eat something or someone that you find. It's a
Something
game
or
that,
someone.
yeah, it's a game that pretty much lo-fi encourages cannibalism amongst like NPCs and even PCs. Like you could be at the point where it's like, well, we haven't had food in 6 days and our stats are going to drop. So we need to eat someone in the group unless something else comes along. So it turns like the experience of measuring resources and just assumes that you did it and takes you to like the most interesting choice you can make from that.
Okay, so let's follow along with that. The first answer, if I understand it, is that with Lost,
Mm-hmm.
the issue was pacing, and then you developed that, um, or we're seeing how you developed that into you made the contrast between in normal dungeoneering you would just map around and you would find the
Yeah.
passage, and so your general approach here is not classic dungeoneering. What it sounds like you're doing is you're doing something that is an event based and time based.
Yeah, pretty much. There's the two scales of mapping in veins. There's large scale maps where there are these fishes. It's almost like line crawling. There are different passages throughout the earth, and they're relatively easy to get through, and there are different kinds. And then you can go off into the wilderness, which is basically climbing into a hole somewhere and exploring like a small system. So you've got large scale maps, and then you can cut down to small scale maps, which are basically like auto-generated dungeons. So if you're on a large scale map and you're lost, or you don't know where you are, you can use the simple mechanic to just burn resources and see how badly things get before you find something. And if you're on a small scale map, you can do that, or you can do it the classic dungeoneering style of like, okay, we take the passage to the left, we climb the flue upwards, or we squeeze through this crack to see if we can find something.
Okay. So that's the overall topography of the game. Is that you've got the ability to for the DM to switch back and forth between the highly specific and then the dead time, moving quickly through the dead time
Yeah.
and then slowly through the exciting time.
Yeah.
Let's talk then about opposition. There are you mentioned a couple of the risks, one of them being hungry party members. What else is out there in terms of what you talk about? I'm starting to guess that you don't have roving bands of orcs.
No, I mean, to be honest, I kind of went overboard on the monster section. My original idea was to have 50 original monsters, and I kind of overwrote them a bit because they were really popular in a series of blog posts. So half the book is like a bestiary of monsters and cultures that you find underground, and they're all based on pretty crazy stuff. So there's a bunch of cultures which are sort of meant to be skins of like D&D stuff. So if you have like any drow stuff or any, there's the deep gnome I can't pronounce, Snifflerbin?
Sverfneblin or something like that. Yeah.
So there are slightly Patrickified versions of those guys, and you can use my rules to paste over them to link them with the like aesthetic of the book. And then there are 50 like different things. So one of them is the Knotsman, which is a kind of a nightmare society based around debt and horror. And there's other like a few other societies. There's like these weird, almost comedic creations which are like Cthulhuid horrors, but they're incredibly stupid and really hard to kill. They're like giant amoeba people. You bump into them, they just want insane things from you because they're idiots, but you can't get through them. Like if you try to hurt them, they just flock on you. You give them what they want, they follow you. Yeah, they're almost, you can't eat them, and they're too stupid to negotiate with, so they're just like hell to be around.
So sort of that's a little bit like the knights who say "knee" who want a shrubbery and there's nothing else
Yeah,
that'll do.
that's kind of the silliest part of the book because I do have a cheese factor, even though I deny it sometimes. Some of them are kind of actual cave organisms, but blown up. So there's a spider called the Trogloraptor, based on most of these creatures have troglobiotic qualities. So things underground tend to lose color. They live very, very slowly and basically do stuff like taking a breath every couple of 100 years. They tend to grow longer limbs and they close their eyes. There's a few other things that happen. So Trogloraptor is like a giant spider that crawls very slowly between veins cultures, steals children, drugs them, carries them off, but only steals the children so he can get the parents to follow them, which it then leads into traps and then eats. And that's a particularly horrible encounter because it's like a complex thing. So you meet this horrible monster spider, it's got these children wrapped up, and it's also leading these parents from different cultures who are also in conflict through this horrible series of. So everyone's in like a terrible state of distress, and you can decide what you want to do with that situation. If you want to be very nice, you could try and rescue the kids. If you want to be very horrible, you could try and exploit it somehow. There's a thing called the anti-phoenix, which is kind of like the inverse of a phoenix, which is obsessed with things ending and hates reincarnation and speaks only dead languages and hates anyone who tries to reincarnate or anyone who is in that kind of mode of thought. And there's a few other things, like a thing called a Tauraptoise, which is kind of like a Velociraptor tortoise, again, with its metabolism ticking way down, so it's just hanging out there for a century, slowly licking the lichen off a rock. And then if it smells something it can eat, within the space of a few seconds, its metabolism kind of pumps up to steroid levels and it becomes like a frantic hyper predator, which then chases you.
That is some awesome stuff. And so those are you said they were Patrickified. What
Yeah.
is the process of patrification?
Oh, that's a good question. In some cases, it's looking at Scrap's art because Scrap did all of the ended up doing all the art for the book.
And Scrap is Scrap Princess, and I've actually done an interview with her before, and I'll try and remember to put the link down in the description. Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
That's okay. So in many cases, it's taking edges of real horror and kind of bleeding them into, I mean, more explicit horror and bleeding them into older ideas. Not that actually makes them better, but it makes them kind of edgier, I suppose, and fits them in with the rest of the place, which is very key to a horror theme. So I think the Suburban were the only good, one of the very few good or not evil cultures in the Veins. So they kind of ended up being based on the Futurist Manifesto. They became kind of obsessed with the moment, with the particular act, with the vibrancy of life. But they were kind of very calm, chilled out Russian futurists. The Drow kind of became this creature called the Aphrodite, which went through a series of mutations in my head because various things didn't work. But my main thing was making them creatures almost of pure terror, pushing them a bit further into the dreamscape,
Hmm.
and filling them. Firstly, they were kind of unreal. They're like creatures evolved from nightmare, from communal nightmare, and then forced into our world. And they're full of this kind of the hatred the Drow meant to have of other races. I kind of amplified it, deepened it, and made it tried to make it more intense. So it's more terrifying. It's based actually distantly on this book I read about antebellum slavery. So it has the Drow kind of obsessed with other races, drawn towards them, but almost viscerally loathing everyone they find. So you're encountering this being which is hyper intelligent, very beautiful, unearthly, powerful, and very cultured and distinct, but which loathes you on an almost instinctual basis and is almost revolted by being around you and really wants to do you harm and will simply use you up until a point where it wants to throw you away. And I think that's probably the darkest one. And that's the general. Basically, I find something I'm interested in something I've read around the world, something that kind of seems like it strikes at the core of the idea and kind of just flow from there and reintegrate. So the Knotsmen are kind of based on my experience working in call centers for credit companies. Uh, I hated it. And my experience working for these companies, which is they were very disingenuous and they would basically have a process where they would low kind of trick people into getting into debt with them. Everything about the surface of the company was very friendly and very happy, and they would continue offering people things. But when you looked at the process underneath, everything was a kind of a half lie, and the whole structure of the company was designed to get people into low level continual debt and just eat away at them. And I would have calls from people who would say, "I've been paying off my debt, so I'm paying this," and because they missed some tiny rule or some tiny element, they were just trapped in this cycle of low level debt, unable to escape. And so the Knotsmen are kind of based slightly on that kind of uh, alienated, kind of false-faced acquisitiveness, and this kind of horrible, endless cycle of being trapped in debt to someone who will never tell you the truth, but who says they're there to help you.
So one of the things you said was that you build terror into things, and another thing that you said was first going for the core of a concept and then building outward.
Yeah.
So those two things come into play together. I mean, do you consciously think about now I'm going to up the terror factor?
It's
Um,
with Veins, I was trying to make things scary because it's meant to be a kind of a scary book. But the most thing I do is I just go through my head and I go for the most powerful emotion that seems to I can relate it to something. In many cases, I've got this pad open in front of me and I'm just writing down words and concepts on sheets of A4. And then if I do that for like an hour or 2 hours, at some point, some powerful cluster of emotions will connect with another cluster of ideas, and it'll be like a lock turning. I'll be like, oh, that's what it is. And usually from that point on, once I get that central concept of what I think could be, from that point on, it's just building up and making sense of it. Uh, and with the Aphrodite, it was like nightmares and kind of super hatred. And for the Knotsman, it was kind of that horrible feeling of debt and that kind of grinning face of deception.
and then to what degree, and this another question here, which is sort of based, on the interview with Scrap, and you were taking there was a feedback loop of information coming from Scrap as well. Um, how to what degree does visualization come into that? Because you've mentioned all kinds of things that are not necessarily visual. The core concept, the face of debt, the
Mhm.
feel of the drow. How much do you what's the visual element that goes into that?
With Veins, that was one of the least integrated things we did together because that was actually one of the things that I started first
Okay.
and then it finished last, basically. So we did a book called Fire in the Velvet Horizon where that was very much basically, I think we finished Veins or we finished something else. I think it was DCO. And we'd done it kind of that way with me basically having ideas and her responding to me. And then we were like, let's do it a different way. And So she would just draw pictures of things, and I would go through them and try and decide what they were, and then we'd go back and forth doing it iteratively, image to text, image to text. With veins, I think it was more driven by me. Fire and the Velvet Horizon is the most integrated that we have, and others are kind of in between.
And I started when I was talking with Scrap. That was the first question that I asked her. Just like I started with Veins of the Earth with you, I started with with the Fire on the Velvet Horizon with her. So that was, that's how I got that idea of the way that you guys interacted. So Veins, okay, so Veins worked a little bit differently. And so the visual element being the least powerful, although it sounds like there's a lot that emerges from it.
I think it's very powerful. Like, her art is really, really good. The only kind of regret I have about it is that we couldn't do it in A4 or larger. Because if you've seen Fire and the Velvet Horizon, because her art is expressionist, it works really well if it's big and it just whacks you in the face. And it's really good on the A5 page, I think, or a lot of it is, but it's like a little bit too small. I didn't do a lot of rewriting after I saw Scrap's art. It was more just her going, "Is this it?" And I'm like, she's like, "Well, do you know what you want?" I'm like, "Can you do something?" And then she would do. I'm really, really bad at giving artists. I've tried to get better at it, but basically, yeah, my feedback is terrible. It's basically me just gesturing and being incoherent. That one was mainly textual, I think. Although maybe I changed a few things.
It was mainly textual, but your approach was to make gestures.
Yeah, I think mainly I wrote them, and then we went back and forth and edited them. And generally, it was her drawing and then responding to what I was saying. Although she did do bits of the Deep Janine, there are bits of her writing in there.
Stepping back away to circle back around to something that you were talking where you were talking about the drow related culture. You mentioned the dreamscape, and that sounds like it is a second concept overlaid into Veins of the Earth to not so much make it work. I mean, it might be something that's in your campaign, but it sounds like there is an intersection with another concept. How much do you develop that in Veins of the Earth?
That's just like in that particular book, it's just like a one entry thing. Like a lot of the creatures and cultures have this weird other realm that they mention that they're from or that they're related to. So there's a really weird one called the Phantom Hand of Gargas, where it's just like based on a real thing, and it's like a hand that you see on the wall, and it basically is just trying to beckon you in somewhere. You don't know where it's going. If you do obey it or go with it, you end up witnessing this empire of the endoliths, which is kind of like an entire parallel world inside rock. And that's based on archaean bacteria who exist literally inside rock and, like I said, divide once every century and manage to subsist inside stones. So that's like, you can go into, it suggests the existence of an entire parallel world. And so for them, that exists for the Aphrodite, the Drow. There's the suggestion that Nightmare or Dreamscape interrelates with the Veins of the Earth or the Underdark somewhere. With these creatures called, we see silicominids. They come from like the magma core of the Earth, and so the suggestion that deep below, if you could attain a different form, you could like turn into a magma being and go hang out with them. There's other creatures that have like anything that might be vaguely related to the Underdark. It's almost as if the place is like a multi-connector to different aspects of depth or deep time. There's creatures called the Archaeans who are like literally based Archaean bacteria. They're like kind of lattice works of hyper-evolved but very, very slow and very beautiful kind of ancient life. And they just respond to it. They're almost impossible to defeat or communicate with. They're not necessarily aggressive, but they're so strange that dealing with them makes you kind of crazy. It's an interconnection of lots of different places. So a lot of the monsters and ideas and things have like they suggest the existence of different worlds. And the Aphrodite have shown up or in my current game distantly as like kind of distant bad guys. So that had a segment where my players went through their veins as well.
So okay, that's cool. So basically, in a way, the Veins of the Earth is one level of depth, and then you suggest other levels where things go even deeper and weirder than that.
Yeah, there's like, I think one of the entries, the substratals, which is basically a reskin of Earth elementals, has a map of the universe or the cosmos as they imagine it, and to them, like everything's made of stone. It's important. Then there's this penumbra of other stuff, which is kind of the ghetto, and occasionally one of them might get snatched out and summoned into this penumbra of kind of crappy, worthless like elemental aspects. And that's what happens when you summon a stone elemental. You're like a UFO guy coming over and snatching someone from a farm and just saying, "I'm going to put you in a different reality. Just do stuff for me." And so it kind of creates these strange forms and these like possible negative effects from what might happen if you just grabbed a being from another plane of reality and didn't know much about them and just tried to command them without understanding their personality or their situation at home.
Well, okay, so that's neat. So really, what we've got here is there is some planar cosmology wrapped up into the depths of the earth themselves. So
Yeah.
you're sort of turning it not. So it sounds like you moved from actual caving back to the very first topic that we talked about, and it sounds like a lot of the overlay that you did to make it work for gaming was to provide some explanations for things. Is that, and the explanations being as large as cosmological? I mean, you've turned the depths of the earth into something that's just part of a much larger and weirder system of things.
Yeah, basically for new things I try to reimagine the world from every creature's point of view and see how they would see it. So for new things, they generally have their own ecology and some weird thing that you can interact with. And for the old things that I kind of reimagined, I just tried to imagine like they're not from here. Clearly, many of them aren't. So where are they from, and how would they see us? Like to them, I try to we all see the world as being arranged around us and our reality, and everything else that it doesn't apply to us is just very distant. It doesn't matter. So I tried to present that point of view inside the description of the creature. So if you interact with them, they don't see you the way that you see you. To them, you're this the feeling of alienation and deep otherness is kind of interesting to me. It doesn't come out anywhere as forcefully as it does in Veins, because that's again like a very deep and dramatic and very like Sturm and Drang and meant to be a bit like Cod Wagnerian book where everything's super dark and super deep and super old. Like I think I made fun of myself by saying, if you're going to say something's 100 years old, why not 100 aeons old? If it's
Yeah,
a mile,
I totally agree with you on that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Why stop there?
yeah. If it's a mile deep, why not be like uncountable leagues deep? Yeah, so everything's from super far away or super long ago or super incomprehensible.
So it's dialed up to 11, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. You mentioned the particular um, side of Veins of the Earth being, Wagnerian and a lot of terror put into it, and also you had the area of the sort of desperate survival issues. Other stuff that you've done. Okay, so you were mentioning that in contrast. What stuff have you done that is not Wagnerian and terror based, or at least what's the spectrum on that?
To me, I think The Maze of the Blue Medusa was kind of meant to be kind of fairy tale esque. I think a lot of parts of it are quite dark, but it's meant to be. That's probably one of the purest things I wrote because it isn't really based on anything, and it's meant to be like kind of very much like wandering through a weird, slightly dark fairy tale with some creepy elements, but not everything's creepy. And a lot of the things in it are quite nice and colorful and just strange. That's kind of like a Jim Henson thing, I think. Um, Far in the Velvet Horizon has dark elements, but it's very kind of Scrap's influence in that book is very powerful. It's very like throbbing with weird life and strange, like fleshy, toothy, buggy creations, and these environments which might be frightening, but which are also very kind of like hypernatural. It's kind of being in a jungle or a swamp or a plain, everything's slightly tilted, but it feels very alive. It's like an insane nature documentary kind of.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Hypernatural as opposed to supernatural.
Yeah, actually, that's probably a point because, especially with Scrap's influence, I think one of the things that I do is I think most people draw from stories or films, and with a lot of what I do, I draw from ripped off science, weird like nature articles, or other aspects of reading that aren't necessarily as closely connected to genre. So for Veins, there's a series of books called by Richard Fortey about geology, and they're all about deep time. And a lot of the feeling he creates in that book with like strata, what it feels like to look at like a million years worth of strata in a cliff and stuff like that. A lot of that feeling is in both Veins and DCO. And with Scrap stuff, she's so into like life and environments, and she just draws like these strange plants and creatures just all the time. So it's impossible to deal with anything she creates without almost creating like a bonkers ecosystem around it, because that's how she sees things. And I think there's a book that we're working on now. It's taken a very long time, but which when it comes out, that's called Broken Fire Regime, and that has like a series of like a two strange weird ecosystems at its core, and it's like a big chunk of it feels very much like hyper nature or other nature rather than standard, more typical genre.
Not so much magical, but something that in its context makes sense, but
Hmm.
you have to figure out that context because it's weird and alien.
Yeah, I like the idea of I like pseudo sense, like the idea that if you could work, like if there's a weird fruit growing somewhere, and if it does a particular thing, like does it have a weird super magical reason for coming? Is it growing from the brain of a dead god? Is it like moon tears or whatever? Like it doesn't necessarily have to make sense, but the things that are interlinked creates this. Like D and D is really good at this world of tools. Everything's an object, and so if you create these complex relationships and dump players in it, they can be like, well, I'll grab the anti-gravity fruit that grows here and I'll take a bunch over here to sell to these guys, or I'll steal this from this guy, or I'll change the environment and something will happen there. And then because you've got these interrelations, it encourages people to kind of put their hands on the world and start doing weird things.
Can you give me a capsule description of what you mean by world of tools?
Like some games present a world of characters and the things that you touch and grab are relevant, and some present like a world of story where there's like a big theme or whatever and it's all running through. But D&D, the way I like to play it old school is like you open your eyes and everything is a potential problem, and everything you can find out or touch or see or hold is something that you can use somehow. You can apply it to something else, and so it's kind of like feels more like Lego in some ways. Like when I'm playing, or in the games that I like to run, people's minds, I hope, are always racing. They're looking around, they're investigating, asking me questions because they've always got problems that are happening or things that they want. And so they're looking around the environment both to find out like aesthetic and social interrelationships so they can try and manipulate those, or just to find actual objects like treasure or swords or like a weird thing that they can do something with. And I think I like that with D&D. I like that sense of the mind quest. That's not a capsule. Sorry, you asked for like a capsule description.
No, that's what I meant. Was that World of Tools is sort of a game concept, and so that was what I meant by capsule. But keep going. I mean, that's
Yeah, I like the sense of like the mind. I always think of it as like like a monkey's hands. Like you can sense some people who are really into old school things. They tend to have like this attention patterns where like there are hands inside the head and they reach out and pressing against everything. Like how far away is that? Can I touch that? Will this move? Okay, if I reach over and look at it from the other side, what happens? So they're kind of modeling the world in a particular way where it's very physical and it's very locked inside their head, and it encourages them to kind of manipulate, investigate, kind of wander around in this kind of slightly crafty, kind of slightly off kilter way that I enjoy.
so you're endorsing that internet meme that says the optimist thinks that the glass is half full, the pessimist thinks that the glass is half empty, and the gamer says, "I drink it. What happens?"
Yeah, yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, but more like I break the glass and use a shard to cut a rope over here. What happens then?
Yep.
Like anything you can repurpose in some weird way.
So one of the things that I talked about with Scrap that she thought was part of what pushed her approach to D&D was that when she and friends started playing, I don't think they even had a copy of a D&D rule book. They had just some. It may have been a computer game manual or something like that. I've forgotten. I can't pull it off the top of my head. But they basically made the game. They'd heard about how it was done, and they had the sort of other thing that would be sort of a guideline and other completely unrelated gaming stuff. It was kind of like if you grabbed three things from the bottom of the closet and then used those to play D&D. So let me ask you a similar question and see what kind of comparative answer we get. When did you start playing D&D, and with what resources did you start?
Relatively recently, I think I started picking up game books around 2001, I think. And then I was reading blogs for a long time, like old schoolish blogs. I forget exactly which ones. And then around 2000 and maybe seven, I think that was in the middle of fourth edition. I picked up the fourth. I got a job that had extra money to it, one of those credit company jobs. So I bought like the fourth edition stuff and said, okay, I'm going to try run a game with like two people that I knew. And we ran through the initial adventure. It was kind of not great, and then we did. I started making stuff up for the town you meant to go, and they had a town called Fallcrest, which was meant to be your adventure town. So I just wrote all kinds of weird stuff for it, like a bunch of weird conspiracies. And they said they all enjoyed my bit more than the original bit. And then I got frustrated with fourth edition, like a lot of people, and I started seeing in most of the blogs that were also frustrated with fourth edition or doing something different or creating content. And then I kind of got sucked into like the lamentation sphere and like the art punk, the arty scene.
Okay, so
And then I got Lamentations. I think I printed it out at our local print shop and had it bound. And then I started running much old school stuff, basically Lamentations and other stuff related to it, like some of it, Raggie's Adventures, and just Vornheim and other things, and just grabbing them together and playing them with friends, along with actually just a lot of random story gamey stuff back in like 2010, I think, and like what was it called? Apocalypse World, ran Microscope, ran some weird samurai games. We were doing a lot of different stuff. We would meet up every week and run like for like 7 sessions or something, just to see what something was like.
So in comparison, whereas Scrap started in a rules gap,
Yeah.
you had some familiarity with rules and then fell into a rules gap, leaving fourth edition, but still having an idea of content you wanted to use, and then came across Lamentations. I mean, how long was that gap? Was that a 10-minute gap, or was that a year gap? Or
It was like like a 5 or 6 session gap. It was like, okay, I understand these rules. I've read them through. It took me a while. I'm pretty sure I can do it. And then you'd play, it would be kind of okay. And then I start improvising and things would improve. And then people would ask me questions like, can I do this? Can I do that? And I would say, oh, no. I would look at the rules from audition and say, oh, no, according to the rules, it works like this. And then later on my own, I'd be thinking, wait, that's just stupid. That doesn't make, why can't you do that? Like, it seems crazy. And then I would find like an entire culture of people who had the same thoughts of like, why can't they do things that seem like they make sense? Why can't they like play characters like this or use things like that? Why does radiant damage only do this? Why can't you use your ridiculous press button power to blast open a door or something? And it's like I fell into that cognitive mode and that like social group about the same time. Like it wasn't long, like a few weeks of playing, I think.
yeah, but I've got a funny story of some playtesting that went on at a convention where Greg Vaughn, who writes Pathfinder, and so it's relatively linear stuff, not because of Greg, but just because of the system and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had a sort of an order of things that were expected to go, and he was playing with Bill Webb, who's basically an original D&D player. And so they had this door, that they were supposed to bypass because it led to a particular area that was slated for later. But Bill had a disintegrate spell, and he disintegrated. The thing was that the door itself was protected against this concept. It was immune to magic. It was utterly protected. This door is invulnerable, and Bill disintegrated the wall next to it.
Right, exactly.
So it was just so one of those sort of outside the box things that not so much with rules but with adventure design is you have to be careful of old school players because they'll always think of something smart.
Yeah. It's like a kind of mindset. 'Cause even when I was a kid playing computer games on like our old 486, like if I was on a shooter or something or any kind of game, I was the kind of person who would click away from the adventure path and just look at the corners of the map, or just kind of clip out and just go around. Like it's almost instinctive desire to just kind of look at the borders of whatever you're currently doing and just like fiddle at the edges. Like I'm not happy unless I've tested the edges of whatever environment I'm in a game, and it's almost instinctual, I think.
Yep. All right. I had one other question that I was going to follow up on, and I've forgotten what it was. So, we occasionally face senior moments when I am running these conversations. And so let me go ahead and say, if, and this one may be a difficult question, but I mean, if you wanted to characterize yourself for somebody who's thinking about going and getting one of the things that you've written, how would you again encapsulate what it is those people are going to get from the Patrickified view of things?
Okay. If you like original concepts and fancy arguably overblown prose in like a D&D format, or an adventure where you genuinely don't know what's going to happen, or something that feels a bit dark and weird, then probably something I've done will be pleasurable to you in some way. And if you like really weird expressionist art, then again, something I've done or been involved with will probably be like, if you're playing D&D, if you're at like the 35-year-old guy stage where you're like, man, I really remember I like D&D, but I'm not like, I don't want to meet a goblin in a cave again. I want to get the feeling I had, not the feeling, I don't want to repeat meeting a goblin in a cave or like fighting an orc. I want the feeling I had when I met that thing for the first time and didn't know what it was and didn't know how to react, and everything was just genuinely strange. That's what I'm trying to create, like a sense of childlike wonder for like 40-year-old guys.
No, I mean, that's something that a lot of people talk about is, how do I play where it's got that same sort of intense novelty, where you really engage with it and you're really, bringing it in rather than having the, I know what a goblin looks like, so you tell me that there's a goblin and I already know what that looks like. And so uh, that's something that I think a lot of people look for when they have, you can either say that they've been very experienced players or that they've become jaded, depending on how much latitude you're going to give them on that.
And there are there are lots of different answers. That my particular thing I'm into is just because of the kind of personality that I have. So my stuff tends to be kind of slightly dark, slightly alienated, and slightly weird. But I was speaking to someone recently at Melon, and what's his face, Bryce Lynch, and had a different idea, which was to do very traditional things, but just to try and carve the sheen of irony and familiarity off them, and try and present them with intensity and vividness as if new. And that was like a way they had of thinking about creating that sense, that feeling of novelty and of newness, that activation in the brain where you kind of wake up internally and you're like, oh, something's like really happening now. I need to like be awake and pay attention to this.
Yeah, and then Melon, who we're talking about that's Gabor Lux in Hungary, I believe, who has done some really, really sort of weird fiction, sword and sorcery writing, and who I think is brilliant. Unfortunately, he doesn't want to do videos because he doesn't like the idea of being on a video and stuff. Or I would absolutely have brought him in. And then Bryce Lynch, although a lot of people don't like him, mainly as a reviewer, and he's got very, very strict things about what he likes and doesn't like. But when you're in that zone, I think he's a very, very good thinker about how that works. And so,
I mean, he's honest about what he wants, which is the most any reviewer can be, really. No one, I don't like getting good reviews or giving them, but I think there are so many complex moral like interactions, especially when you're reviewing like a relatively small community, that it's like you just say people, this is what I'm into, and I will stick to that. And if this doesn't meet my particular standards, I will tell you why without any like fluffing around. I think that's generally what Bryce does.
And cuss words at people, swear words.
Oh yeah, he does that as well.
Yeah, I think he's. I've seen it. I've seen a couple people who were quite broken by reviews that he gave without quite, I think, not quite understanding what Bryce does. So.
Yeah, I moderate. I swear a lot in my head, and I'm kind of a sweary guy, and I've tried to moderate it somewhat, especially if I'm giving like saying anything negative, because it's read so many different ways in so many different places. It's like a speech bred from familiarity with people that I have social contact with, where there's like a constant flow of exchange of power, and then when it goes online, that's not how it works at all. If it's being broadcast out to a wide range of people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up for now, and except to say that I've heard a lot of people clamoring for reprints of Maze of the Blue Medusa. So.
Ken said there might be one this year. I'm not like deep in the loop on that one, but hang around. I think he is planning to reprint soonish.
All right. So let's go ahead and we'll wrap it up there. So say goodbye to all of the fans.
Goodbye, fans.
And I'll say to everybody, no matter what kind of Dungeons and Dragons it is that you play, imagine the hell out of it.